One of the most popular investing strategies out there is investing in a low-fee S&P 500 ETF or exchange-traded fund. Even Warren Buffett himself recommends this approach for most people. Now, I have a full video about S&P 500 investing that I'll put in the corner, but here's a basic overview. The Standard & Poor's 500 Index is a market value weighted index of the 500 largest publicly traded U.S. companies. And market value weighted simply means that the larger a company is, the more weight they will carry in the index. So when you invest in the S&P 500, a large portion of your money goes into stocks like Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, Amazon, and Meta because of how large these companies are. Now, FinViz has a heat map that will show you a visual of this in action. The larger the square is, the more of your money gets allocated there. Now, according to NerdWallet, the S&P 500 has returned about 10% on average per year over the last century, assuming you are reinvesting dividends. And later on, I'll be showing you how to enable automatic dividend reinvestment with the Robinhood app to make sure you are maximizing your return potential. The S&P 500 provides you with broad diversification across a large portion of the entire US economy. When you invest in the S&P 500, your money is spread out across all of these different sectors and industries. So even if one particular company or segment of the economy takes a nosedive, the rest of what you own will help you offset that, and that's the benefit of diversification. You also have the benefit of being able to follow a set it and forget it approach. That means you can fully automate this strategy and then spend your time doing whatever you want to instead of actively managing a stock portfolio. So let's go ahead and make an investment in the S&P 500 now using Robinhood. And we're going to be using the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, which trades under the symbol VOO. So every stock and fund out there that trades on the major exchanges has a set symbol, and you'll need to know this in order to find the stock, but you can also just type in the name of the company or the fund. What you're going to want to do is click on the search bar in the top right, and then we're going to type in VOO, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. Now, as you can see, I already own a fractional share of this ETF from my prior tutorial. So if we click on that, this will bring up the page here for the Vanguard S&P 500 fund, and we can look at the performance over different periods of time. So over the last week, it's up just shy of 1%. Over the last month, we have about a 2.8% return. Over the last 3 months, you're looking at about 8.4%. Year to date, the S&P 500 is up an astounding 18%, give or take. Over the last year, it's about 25%. Over the last 5 years, it's almost an 88% return, and the maximum here, you can see how the S&P 500, despite the ups and downs, has continued to move in a positive direction. And if you wanted to click on the chart here and look at the specific price action, you can move your finger along just like this, and it will show you where the price has been. And if you double tap here, you can compare different time periods to see what the return was of the S&P 500 or whatever you're looking at in that set window of time. Now, if we scroll down here, it's going to give us information about my existing position in the S&P 500, and you can see here that I have 0.04176 shares that were purchased at an average cost of $458.33. So as a result, I've already experienced a total return of almost 12% on this fractional share investment that I made just a few months ago. Now, keep in mind, the S&P 500 doesn't always go up. If we revisit the chart here, the S&P 500 actually declined by about 25%, but despite that, it did continue to go up in value thereafter, which is why you want to generally ride things out when you're making a diversified investment like something like the S&P 500. If we keep scrolling down here, we'll get more information here about the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, and one of my favorite features here is that you can get a visual of what is actually held within the fund. So earlier we took a look at that FinViz heat map that showed all of the different segments of the US economy in the S&P 500, and this gives you a percentage breakdown. So when you invest in the S&P 500, about 31.5% of your money goes right into tech companies, and then financial companies are the second largest component at about 12.5%. Then you have healthcare at 12%, consumer cyclical at 10%. I won't go through all of these, but this shows you a visual breakdown of what segments of the economy are carrying the most weight in this investment. And if we click here on the top 10 holdings, this shows you what percentage percentage of your money goes right into the top 10 companies. And it's pretty crazy because 34% of all of the money put into the S&P 500 goes right into just the top 10 companies alone, and then the remaining 66%, give or take, is going into those other 490 companies because of how dominant these have become. So when you invest in the S&P 500, about 7% of your money goes right into Microsoft, a little under 6.5% goes into Apple, about 6% of your money goes into Nvidia, about 3.5% goes into Amazon, and then you have Meta Platforms, both share classes of Alphabet or Google as well, making up a large component. You have Berkshire Hathaway, Eli Lilly, and then JP Morgan Chase making up the largest components of the S&P 500. If we keep scrolling down here, you'll see a statistics section which will give you information about the trading volume as well as the total market cap, and it also shows the dividend yield. So for example, based on the current share price, the yield for this ETF is 1.27%. So you would earn that dividend yield on a quarterly basis, and as mentioned before, if you want to maximize your return potential, you'll want to reinvest those dividends, allowing you to earn future dividends from the dividends you earned prior. Now the volume at the top right is showing you how many shares have traded hands so far today. So if you keep an eye on that, you're going to see that continuing to go up over time. And you can also see here that they have an expense ratio listed. With fund investments like ETFs, there is an expense which is used to pay the fund managers, but Vanguard has some of the lowest expenses in the industry, and this comes in at an expense ratio of just 0.03%. So on $10,000 invested, you're talking about $3 per year in expenses, and that is automatically taken out of the fund. It's not something that you have to pay separately or anything like that. If we keep scrolling down here, you can also see the people also own section, which gives you other investments that are popular for those who also own VOO. And then we can look at the history here. And this is interesting because it will show you where my small dividend was reinvested. So for the very first time here in this account, I bought shares in April of 2024. I bought $20 worth, and then I actually sold off $1 worth of this in June for a demo purpose. But you can see here that in July, I received a 7-cent dividend, and this was automatically reinvested back into the ETF. So this dividend reinvestment allowed me to buy an additional 0.0416 shares of VOO at a share price of $507.25, meaning that this little fractional share will now earn future dividends itself. And then if you scroll down further, you can look at the average annual return from this fund investment. So if you take a look here at the last year, it's up about 25%. So we're in a pretty strong bull market right now. Over the last 3 years, the average return is 10%. Over the last 5, you're looking at about 15. Over the last 10, it's a 12.8% return. And since September of 2010, it's been about a 14.4% return. So we mentioned earlier that NerdWallet said the average return from the stock market has been about 10% annually, but in recent years, we have actually seen a higher average rate of return from the S&P 500. So that's it for the details on the home screen now. Let's go ahead and purchase a fractional investment in the S&P 500. What we're going to want to do is click on the trade button here at the bottom right, and then we're going to click on the buy button, and this is going to bring up the order ticket window. Now we're going to get into the different order types available through Robinhood later on when we invest in a stock, but for now I'm just going to show you how to invest in fractional shares of VOO. By default, it's set in dollar value, so if you wanted to put $1 into the S&P 500, you would do $1 and then click on review, and this would buy you 0.00194 shares. But for this demonstration here, I want to actually put $25 of the 50 that I deposited into the S&P 500. So we typed out 25, we're going to click on review, and then once you're all set with the order here and everything looks good, all you have to do is swipe up to submit that order, and just like that, the order was filled, and we bought $25 worth of the S&P 500 ETF, which is 0.048743 shares at an average price of $512.89. Now, if you want to view the order, you can click on this and it will show you more details about when it was filled and things like that. But for the most part, that's all you need to know. And then when you scroll up here, it now adjusts your overall position. So now my total return is just 5.15%, but it's because I own a larger amount of this fund at this point in time.